My son chose his wife's birthday instead of his father's funeral, and the next day he came to me with a request. But I did something he definitely didn't expect. My dear friends, let me ask you a question. Have you ever poured your entire soul into building a life for someone, given them every piece of your heart and every ounce of your strength, only to have them treat that precious gift like it was worthless? Before we begin this story, I want to feel the strength of our community that gathers here. In the comments below, please tell me what city and state or what country you're watching from today. It brings me such comfort to know that we are all connected, sharing these moments together, no matter the distance. And if you believe in the power of family, dignity, and the unbreakable spirit of a mother, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. You will want to be here to see how this story ends. Now find a comfortable seat. Let me tell you about the morning the world as I knew it fell away, and a different woman rose from the ashes. The silence in our Maple Creek home wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that had smothered all the joy since my Samuel passed. It had a texture, thick and dusty, and a smell of stale air and fading lilies from the sympathy bouquets that lined the hall. For 45 years, this kitchen had been the vibrant heart of our world, alive with the sound of Samuel, humming old gospel tunes off-key while he brewed the morning coffee, the comforting murmur of the news on his small radio, and the sizzle of bacon in his cast-iron skillet on Sundays. Now the only sound was the frantic, desperate beat of my own heart, a frantic drum against my ribs, counting down the hours until I had to say my final goodbye to the man who was my everything. It was 8:30 in the morning, the day of his funeral. His favorite coffee mug, a heavy ceramic thing with a silly cartoon bear on it that our son Kevin had given him for Father's Day 30 years ago, sat on the counter. It had a small chip on the rim, and for years I'd tried to replace it, but Samuel would just laugh. "This mug and I have seen too many sunrises together to part ways now, Eleanor," he'd say. Now it was just an empty monument to 1,000 shared mornings. My fingers, feeling frail and foreign, trembled as I dialed Kevin's number. Our only child. The center of Samuel's universe. He was the one person I needed, the one person who was supposed to stand beside me, a pillar of strength to help me bear the unbearable. I clung to that hope like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. My hand hovered over the phone, my thumb hesitating on the final digit. A knot of dread was tightening in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't explain. I'd been trying to reach him since yesterday with no luck. He's just busy with the arrangements, I told myself. He's grieving in his own way. I had to believe that. I had to believe that the boy we had raised, the boy whose scraped knees we had bandaged, and whose college tuition we had paid with overtime and foregone vacations, would be the man his father needed him to be today. The phone rang 3 times, each shrill, electronic pulse and intrusion on the sacred silence of my grief. Finally he answered, his voice a thick, irritated mumble. "Hey, Mom!" "Kevin, honey," I began, my own voice a fragile whisper I barely recognized. "I just wanted to remind you, the service is at 11:30. Please, son, don't be late." A sharp, piercing shriek of laughter erupted in the background. It was his wife, Chloe. Then, a thumping, brainless beat of some pop song assaulted my ears, a sound so utterly alien to the grief that filled my home. "Oh my God, turn it up. Did you see the size of these balloons?" I heard her yell, her voice dripping with a kind of manufactured excitement. My mind struggled to connect the two realities. His world of balloons and music, and my world of caskets and unbearable loss. "Mom, look," Kevin said, his voice now sharp with the impatience I had come to know too well. "I told you, today is Chloe's 30th birthday party. The big one. We've been planning this for months." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the phone feeling as heavy as a gravestone against my ear. "Kevin," I said, my voice shaking, "this is your father's funeral, the day we say goodbye. It only happens once." His reply was not just cruel, it was a complete severance, a final demolition of the image I held of my son. "Well, Dad's not coming back, is he? And Chloe only turns 30 once." He didn't wait for a response. The line went dead, with an indifferent click. He hung up on me. He chose a birthday party over honoring the man who had spent his life building a legacy for him. The buzz of the dial tone was the loneliest sound I had ever heard, and if you think that was the worst of his disrespect, you have no idea what was coming. The secret I would uncover in my dear Samuel's Bible would change everything and set in motion a storm that would swallow his entire world. You'll want to stay for this. I stared at the funeral program on the table. The paper felt slick and cool beneath my fingers. There was Samuel's face smiling out at me, and there, under the heading Pallbearers, was his name printed in elegant stoic script, Mr. Kevin Stone. My hand reached for the black pen beside my checkbook. It did not tremble now. It was steady, guided by a purpose as cold and clear as ice. With a single forceful stroke, I drew a line through his name. The ink was thick and absolute, a final, unforgiving scar on the page. It wasn't just a name I was striking out. It was a future. It was the end of a promise. In that moment, the grieving, heartbroken widow began to fade, and the matriarch of the Stone family, the woman who would protect Samuel's legacy at all costs, began to rise. The scent of 1,000 white lilies, Samuel's favorite, was so thick inside the church it was almost hard to breathe. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the solemn faces of our friends and neighbors in hues of sapphire and ruby. Deacon Williams played "His Eye is on the Sparrow" on the old organ, the notes swelling to fill the sacred space, a sound that had comforted me for 40 years but now felt hollow. The pews were filled with the history of our lives. The Jacksons, who we'd had cookouts with every summer for 30 years, Mrs. Gable, who taught Kevin in Sunday school, the men from Samuel's construction company, their work-roughened hands folded awkwardly in their laps. They'd all come to honor a good man. Their presence was a warm blanket of support, yet it only made the gaping hole beside me in the front pew feel colder and more conspicuous. This was where my son was supposed to be. My cousin Martha squeezed my hand, her touch both a comfort and a question. "Where is that boy, Eleanor?" she whispered, her brow furrowed with concern. "He should be right here holding his mother's hand." I felt the eyes of the other church mothers on me, their gazes a mixture of pity and quiet judgment. Shame, hot and acidic, rose in my throat. What could I say? How could a mother admit that her only child, the heir to everything we had ever built, had chosen a party over his own father's memory? He had an unavoidable commitment, I murmured, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. The words were a betrayal to Samuel, to our community, and to myself. At the graveside, a cold wind whipped across the open field, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree that stood guard over the plots. 23 people stood with me as the pastor spoke of dust and ashes, of eternal life and cherished memories. But the one person who shared my blood and my husband's name was absent. The space where he should have stood, ready to receive condolences and be the man of the family, was a void that screamed his negligence to the world. I watched them lower the casket into the earth, my heart plummeting with it, and a new terrible understanding settled upon me. Samuel had always been blind when it came to Kevin. He saw not the man our son was, but the man he prayed he would become. I remembered just before his diagnosis, Kevin had forgotten our 44th anniversary. He'd called 2 days later, laughing it off. I had been furious, but Samuel had calmed me down. "He's busy, Eleanor," he'd said, that gentle, forgiving tone in his voice. "He's got a wife, a career. He's building his own life." His own life, a life built on a foundation of our sacrifice, a life he felt was too important to pause for even a few hours to honor his own father. Returning to the house was the hardest part. The casseroles and plates of fried chicken left by loving neighbors filled the kitchen counters, but the home itself was desolate. The silence I had woken up to had returned, but now it was deeper, more permanent. I walked through the rooms, touching the back of his leather armchair, running my hand over the books on his nightstand. Every object was a testament to a life well lived, a life of integrity, hard work, and boundless love for a son who, I was beginning to realize, had perhaps never truly loved us back. He had loved what we provided. Exhausted to my very bones, I sank into Samuel's armchair. It still held the faint, comforting scent of him. I closed my eyes, wanting to feel him near, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of my new reality. My gaze fell upon the old leather-bound family Bible on the side table, its pages filled with the underlined verses that had given Samuel strength through the years. Needing that strength for myself, I reached for it. It was heavy, a physical anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. As I opened it to his favorite psalm, a single folded piece of paper slipped from between the brittle pages and drifted to the floor. Curious, I bent down and picked it up. It was a sheet of notebook paper, the kind Samuel kept by his bedside. The handwriting was shaky, weakened by his illness, but it was unmistakably his. My heart clenched. It was a note addressed to me. "Eleanor, my love," it began, "if you are reading this, then my time has come. My only regret is leaving you, but my spirit will always be with you. I need to ask you to be strong about something. I'm worried about Kevin. Sometimes I fear he loves the life we gave him more than the people who gave it. He's a good man at heart, but he has a weakness in him, a softness that Chloe encourages. Please don't let him forget us. Don't let him squander what we worked our whole lives to build. We gave him everything. It is your job now to make sure he remembers what family truly means." Tears streamed down my face, blurring the precious, painful words. This wasn't just a letter. It was a final request, a sacred duty. Samuel had seen it all. In his quiet wisdom, he had understood the truth of our son's character, a truth I had been too blinded by a mother's love to accept. He was asking me to be the guardian of his legacy. I folded the note, the paper feeling like a holy relic in my hand, and tucked it into my pocket. The grief was still a vast, dark ocean inside me, but now, in the middle of that ocean, there was an island of purpose. A cold, hard resolve solidified in my soul. I thought the emptiness in my house was the most painful thing I'd ever feel. But what would I do when that ungrateful child called me the very next morning, not with an apology, but with a hand stretched out for more money? Sleep did not come for me that night. The moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the living room floor as I sat in Samuel's armchair, his note clutched in my hand. The paper had grown soft and worn from the constant clenching of my fist. The initial storm of tears had passed, leaving behind a strange and unnerving calm. The grief was still there, a dull, constant ache deep in my bones, but it was no longer the all-consuming force it had been. It was changing, crystallizing into something colder, harder. It was becoming fuel. Samuel's last words echoed in my mind, not as a lament, but as a directive. We gave him everything. Make sure he remembers what family truly means. I looked around the house we had built, room by room, from a tiny 2-bedroom starter into this comfortable, sprawling home. I didn't just see memories anymore. I saw a ledger. I saw the new sunroom, built with the money from the 1,000 double shifts I pulled at the hospital when the kids were young. I saw the fine oak floors, paid for by a decade of Samuel's weekend side jobs, his hands raw and blistered, but his spirit unwavering. We had poured our youth, our sweat, and our dreams into these walls, all with the singular vision of giving our son a life free from the struggles we had known, a life of comfort, of opportunity, of privilege, a life he had so casually spat on. A cold resolve settled over me. Samuel's request was not just about emotion, it was about legacy. And a legacy, I realized, could be quantified. It could be counted. Before the sun had even begun to hint at its arrival, I walked into Samuel's home office. The air was thick with the scent of him. Old books, cedar wood, and the faint, sweet aroma of the pipe tobacco he saved for special occasions. It was a sanctuary of his hard work. I ran my fingers over his heavy oak desk, then pulled open the drawer of his filing cabinet, the metal rollers groaning in the silence. For 40 years, Samuel had meticulously saved every major receipt, every bank statement, every financial document of our lives. "You never know when you'll need to see the map of where you've been," he used to say. I was about to draw that map. I pulled out the first thick folder, the label written in his neat block handwriting, Kevin Education. Inside were the records of his 4 years at a private university clear across the country. I remembered how he'd insisted on going there, despite having a full scholarship offer from a state school nearby. "It has more prestige, Dad," he'd argued, and Samuel, who never wanted his son to feel second best, had agreed without hesitation. I pulled out the calculator from the desk drawer and began. Tuition, room and board, books, lab fees. The numbers clicked and whirred, each one a memory of a sacrifice made. I tallied up the final sum for his bachelor's degree, a number so large it made me gasp. It was enough to have been a down payment on 3 houses in our neighborhood. I wrote it down on a fresh legal pad, the first entry in a long and painful accounting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was only the beginning. The true cost of our son's life was buried far deeper in these files, and I was going to unearth every last cent. For what felt like an eternity, I worked under the solitary, focused glow of Samuel's old brass desk lamp. The sun had long since risen, painting the sky outside in shades of pale rose and gold, but I paid it no mind. I was in a mausoleum of memory, a world of paper and ink, of promises made and devastating costs incurred. My journey began with the file labeled Kevin Postgrad. My breath caught as I pulled out the crisp official documents from the prestigious MBA program he'd been so passionate about attending. I was transported back to a Sunday dinner, the aroma of my pot roast filling the air. Kevin, animated and charming, had laid out his grand vision, talking about synergy and market disruption, arguing that this degree was the only way to properly modernize and expand Samuel's company one day. Samuel had listened, his chest swelling with pride, seeing the future of his life's work in the confident eyes of his son. We paid the entire year's tuition up front, a sum that had required us to liquidate a stock portfolio we had been carefully building for 20 years. And then, after a single 4-month semester, he was done. "It's too rigid, Mom. It's all theory," he had complained over the phone, his tone full of the weary sighs of a misunderstood genius. "It's stifling my creativity." I remembered the hot flash of anger I felt, the words of rebuke that died on my lips as I saw the look on Samuel's face. Not disappointment, but a deep parental pride in his son's supposed independent spirit. "Let the boy find his passion, Eleanor," he'd said later that night, his voice gentle. "A man without passion is just a machine." That one semester of stifled creativity and passion-seeking cost us more than my own parents had earned in their entire lives combined. I wrote the non-refundable six-figure number on the legal pad. It felt like writing an epitaph for our own foolishness. The next file was thinner but told a story of a different kind of extravagance. It was labeled Europe Perspective. After the MBA fiasco, Kevin had convinced us that a 6-month trip through Europe was what he needed to find himself and gain a global perspective. He'd made it sound like an educational pilgrimage. The credit card statements inside told the real story. I saw receipts from a 5-star hotel overlooking the Seine in Paris, a charge for over $1,000 at a single restaurant in Rome, and a bill from a bespoke tailor in London. He was buying handmade leather shoes in Florence the same month Samuel and I had decided to patch the old roof ourselves, spending 2 weekends on a rickety ladder because hiring a proper crew felt like an indulgence. Each receipt was a small, sharp betrayal. He was living the life of a prince while his father, the king who funded his kingdom, was still working 60-hour weeks. The total for his perspective trip was obscene. I added it to the column, my hand beginning to cramp. But all of that was a prelude to the main event. The next folder was thick and heavy, filled with intimidating notarized documents. The label, in my husband's proud script, read, "Kevin and Chloe, Willow Lane House." I remembered the day Samuel took me to see the house they wanted. It was a sprawling new construction in an exclusive gated community with a 3-car garage and a backyard big enough for a swimming pool. It was far grander than anything we had ever dreamed of for ourselves. "It's an investment, Ellie," Samuel had said, his eyes shining. "A place for our grandchildren to run around." We sat in a cold, impersonal bank office days later. I watched Samuel's strong, calloused hand, the same hand that had laid bricks and framed houses for decades, sign the cashier's check for $400,000. It was nearly everything we had in liquid savings. He saw it as the culmination of his American dream, the ultimate act of passing the torch to the next generation. Now, looking at the copy of that check, all I could feel was a profound sense of violation. That house, our single greatest gift, our legacy of security for him, was the very place where his father's memory was desecrated for a birthday party. The number on my legal pad now stretched past 7 figures. It was a monument to our son's bottomless entitlement, built brick by brick with our blind love. I leaned back in the creaking leather chair, the sheer weight of it all threatening to crush me. I thought I had seen the worst of it, but then my fingers brushed against the last folder, a thick one tucked away at the back, almost hidden from view. It was labeled with a single ominous word, miscellaneous. My heart sank. The other expenses, as wasteful as they were, had been framed as investments in his future. This one felt different. This one felt like a secret. And as I opened it, I understood that the fortune we had spent building his life was nothing compared to the one we had spent erasing his mistakes. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the final folder, the one labeled with the deceptively simple word, miscellaneous. The other folders, for all their painful revelations, had a sense of order to them. They were investments, however foolish and unappreciated. They represented a misguided hope for our son's future. This folder felt different. It was thicker than the others, bulging with a chaotic mix of documents. Not the neat bank statements and official letters of the other files, but a jumble of crumpled receipts, threatening-looking letters with red overdue notices, and copies of Samuel's personal checks. This was not a record of investment. This was a record of emergencies, of messes cleaned up in the quiet shame of night. With a deep, steadying breath, I opened it, and the curated, respectable image of my son's life completely disintegrated. The first thing I found was a thick stack of credit card statements from high-end department stores, all in Chloe's name, held together by a rusty paper clip. The balances were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars spent on designer handbags, shoes, and clothes I couldn't even imagine a price for. Tucked behind each statement was a carbon copy of a personal check, written in Samuel's steady hand, paying the balance in full. I was immediately transported to a memory from 2 years prior. Chloe had shown up at our house alone, her eyes red-rimmed with crocodile tears. Kevin was out of town on a business trip. She'd spun a sorrowful tale about her own mother's sudden, expensive illness and how she'd had to put the medical bills on her credit cards. Terrified to worry Kevin, she had played her part perfectly, the dutiful, overwhelmed daughter-in-law. I remembered Samuel's kind face, how he'd patted her hand and said, Now, your family. We take care of our family. Don't you worry about a thing." He had gone to his office and written her a check, and when he returned, he'd simply told me he was helping the kids out with a little bill. Looking at these statements now, I saw no evidence of pharmacy bills or hospital copays. I saw a luxury shopping spree. She had weaponized my husband's kindness, using a fabricated illness as a cover for her own rampant materialism. My blood ran cold with the calculated cruelty of it. Deeper in the folder, I found the ghosts of Chloe's entrepreneurial fantasies. It started with a file for Chloe's Cups of Heaven, her artisanal cupcake boutique. I found a copy of a 1-year commercial lease that Samuel had paid for up front. I found receipts for industrial-grade mixers that cost more than my first car, a custom-designed pink neon sign, and invoices for organic imported vanilla beans that cost a small fortune. The business had lasted exactly 6 months before she'd gotten bored and abandoned it, leaving Samuel to settle the broken lease with the irate landlord. The total loss was well over $100,000, a sweet dream that had turned into a bitter financial poison. But she hadn't stopped there. Next, I found the evidence of her attempt to become a lifestyle influencer. It was almost laughable if it weren't so infuriating. There were receipts for thousands of dollars in camera equipment, lighting rigs, and multiple designer outfits that were, according to a small note she'd written to Samuel, essential for brand aesthetic. The final item was a bill from a 5-star resort in the Caribbean, where she and Kevin had gone for a week to shoot content. The only content they seemed to have produced was a mountain of debt, which, once again, Samuel had quietly and lovingly paid off. They were children playing in a sandbox of endless money, and we were the fools who kept filling it with our life savings. Just when I thought my heart could not get any harder, I found the evidence of Kevin's own recklessness. It was a thick, legal envelope containing correspondence from a law firm. Inside was the story of the brand new sports car we had helped him buy for his 35th birthday. Samuel had co-signed the loan, of course. 3 months after getting the car, Kevin had been in an accident, running a red light and hitting another vehicle. The police report made it clear he was at fault. I found a copy of a check for $50,000 written by Samuel to the other driver's attorney. It was a settlement to avoid a lawsuit and keep the incident off of Kevin's record. I remembered the phone call that night. Kevin had been frantic, but not with remorse. He was panicked about the damage to his precious car and the inconvenience of it all. "It was a total setup, Dad," he'd whined. "The guy slammed on his brakes for no reason." Samuel, desperate to protect his son from any and all consequences, had simply taken care of it. He had paid for the silence, paid for the problem to disappear. He wasn't protecting Kevin's reputation. He was dissolving his character, teaching him that money could erase any mistake. For another hour, I sifted through the rest of the file, paid off student loans for Chloe that they'd never told us about, a loan for a down payment on a boat they had sold a year later, countless smaller checks for unspecified emergencies. Finally, I reached the bottom of the folder. My legal pad was now filled with a long column of damning numbers. My hand was cramping as I held the pen. I took a deep breath and began the final, terrible calculation. The education, the MBA, the trip, the house, Chloe's shopping sprees, her failed businesses, the car accident, the secret loans. I clicked the final equals button on the calculator. The number that stared back at me was obscene. It was a number that represented the sum total of our life's work, of every extra shift, every missed vacation, every sacrifice. It was the price of our son. I stared at that final number, and the last of my softness crumbled into dust. This wasn't a story of generosity. It was a story of a parasite. We hadn't been giving our son a better life. We had been shielding him from life itself. We had built a fortress of money around him that had prevented him from ever feeling the sting of failure, the chill of consequence, or the need for genuine character. Samuel's boundless love had been used as a tool by our son and his wife to feed their endless appetites. As the sun began to set, casting a long, blood-red shadow across my husband's desk, I knew my accounting was not yet finished. The debt had been calculated. Now it was time for the collection to begin. All I had to do was wait for the phone to ring, and I knew with absolute certainty that it would. The office was tomb silent, the only sound the faint hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. I sat behind Samuel's desk, the legal pad with its monstrous final number laid out before me like a judgment. The audit was complete. My life's work, my husband's legacy, distilled into a single obscene figure representing the cost of our son. The sun had now set, and the world outside the window was painted in the deep, bruised purple of twilight. I felt no exhaustion. No more tears. The grief that had hollowed me out for days had been replaced by a dense, heavy certainty. I was no longer a victim adrift in a sea of sorrow. I was an agent of consequence, the executor of a debt that had been left unpaid for far too long. For the next hour as I waited, I put my husband's house in order. I methodically took the chaotic pile of receipts, letters, and statements and organized them. I sorted them by date and category, clipping each sordid episode together: Chloe's shopping sprees, the failed cupcake shop, the disastrous influencer trip, the legal settlement for the car accident. I placed them back into their respective folders, creating a perfect, undeniable archive of their deceit and our enablement. I took the legal pad, with its long column of figures culminating in the final sum of nearly $1.5 million, and wrote a title on the top line in clear, block letters: The Kevin and Chloe Ledger. This physical act of bringing order to the chaos was a reflection of the change within me. My mind was sharp, my purpose clear. I was no longer just a mother, I was an archivist of the truth, and I was preparing my case. As I worked, my thoughts turned to Samuel's true legacy. It wasn't this pile of money we had squandered on our son. His legacy was in the grain of the oak desk beneath my hands, in the solid foundation of the house around me. It was Legacy Homes, the company he had started with a single pickup truck and 2 employees, and built into the most respected construction firm in the county. He built it on a foundation of honesty, a fair price for a good day's work, and the simple, powerful principle of keeping your word. He had wanted to give Kevin a head start, but in our desperate desire to shield him from hardship, we had denied him the one thing Samuel valued most, the profound satisfaction of building something yourself. We had given him a kingdom, but we had denied him the character to rule it. In honoring my husband, I now realized I had to honor his principles, not his blind love, and his principles demanded accountability. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. My heart gave a single hard thud, but my hand was perfectly steady as I lifted the receiver. I knew who it was. "Hey, Mom." Kevin's voice was breezy, cheerful, completely devoid of any awareness of the abyss that had opened between us. It was the voice of a man calling to ask for a favor, not the voice of a son who had just abandoned his mother at his father's funeral. "Kevin," I said. My voice was even, calm, a stranger to my own ears. "Listen, I know things have been, tense," he began, the closest he would ever get to an apology. "But I've got a little situation here. You know how Chloe's party was just spectacular? Well, the final bill from the caterer is a little more than we anticipated, and I want to get it paid off right away. Plus, I saw this diamond bracelet, and she just deserves the best, She's been such a rock through all this." I remained silent. All this. He said it as if his father's death was a minor social inconvenience he had been forced to navigate. I let the silence stretch, a vast, cold expanse between us. "Mom, you there?" he asked, a flicker of impatience in his voice. Anyway, long story short, I'm in a bit of a jam. I just need about $15,000 to clear everything up. If you could just transfer it over, I'd really appreciate it. I looked down at the ledger on the desk, at the final 7-figure number. I thought of my husband's calloused hands, of his final worried note, of the empty space beside me at his grave. All the pain, all the grief, all the anger of the last 48 hours coalesced into a single, perfect, and unbreakable word. No. It was quiet. Not shouted, not angry. It was a word as calm and final as a closing door. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could almost hear his brain trying to process a word he had never, in his entire 36 years, heard from me in a financial context. "What?" he finally stammered, his disbelief evident. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Kevin," I repeated, the word feeling more powerful each time I said it. "The bank of Mom and Dad is closed, permanently." His disbelief curdled into anger. "What has gotten into you? This is Chloe we're talking about. Dad would have wanted me to have this. He would have given it to me in a second." "Your father is gone, Kevin," I said, my voice as cold as the grave he had failed to visit. "And the indulgent mother you seem to be remembering, she died with him." A nasty, vicious tone entered his voice now. The charming mask had fallen away completely. "Fine," he spat. "If you're going to be like that, don't expect to see us around much. You'll be all alone in that big empty house. I hope you're happy." He slammed the phone down. The connection was cut. I was left holding the receiver, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, but I felt no pain, no fear at his threat. He thought his absence was a punishment. He had no idea it was a gift. He hung up the phone believing he had the last word, but he had only ended a conversation. I was about to end his entire world. My next call would not be to my son. It would be to the company his father built. It was time to remove the rot from legacy homes, starting at the very top. The sun rose the next morning, painting the eastern sky with strokes of defiant orange and gold. For the first time since Samuel's passing, I didn't see it as a painful reminder of another day I had to face without him. I saw it as a promise, a beginning. I had not slept, but I was not tired. A strange, clean energy hummed through my veins, a fusion of righteous anger and absolute clarity. The period of mourning was over. The period of reckoning had begun. I walked to my closet, bypassing the somber blacks and grays I had worn for days. My hand went to the back, to a section I hadn't touched in years. I pulled out a charcoal gray pantsuit, impeccably tailored, the kind I used to wear to board meetings in the early days when Samuel and I were fighting to get the company off the ground. I put it on, along with a simple silk blouse and the pearl earrings Samuel had given me on our 20th anniversary. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw the lines of grief etched around my eyes, but I also saw a woman I hadn't seen in a very long time. It was the woman who had co-signed the first loan for Samuel's business with nothing but fierce belief as collateral. It was the woman who had managed the company's books at our kitchen table until midnight after putting in a full shift as a nurse. It was Eleanor Stone, co-founder of Legacy Homes. And she was going back to work. The drive to the company headquarters was a journey through time. I passed the small industrial park where Samuel had rented his first tiny workshop, a dusty garage where he'd worked with 2 other men, their faces streaked with sweat and hope. I remembered bringing them thermoses of hot coffee on cold mornings, the pride in Samuel's eyes as he showed me the blueprints for their very first project. Now, I pulled my car into a reserved parking spot in front of a sleek, 3-story glass and steel building with the words Legacy Homes inscribed in elegant brushed steel letters over the entrance. This building, this success, was as much my legacy as it was his, and I was here to protect it. My arrival in the lobby caused a ripple of quiet surprise. The young receptionist, Brenda, looked up, her eyes wide. Most of the employees only knew me as Samuel's quiet, smiling wife who appeared at the annual Christmas party. They had never seen me like this. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and even. "I'll be working from Mr. Stone's office today. Would you please hold all my calls?" "Of course, Mrs. Stone," she stammered, fumbling with her headset. I walked past the rows of cubicles, the gentle murmur of keyboards and phone calls momentarily ceasing as I passed. I didn't go to Kevin's office, a large corner affair that I knew he had demanded. I went to Samuel's. It had been kept just as he left it, a sanctuary of his life's work. I sat down in his large leather chair. It felt right. From his desk, I called Brenda. "Please ask Sarah Morgan from HR and David Chen from accounting to come to my office at their earliest convenience, separately." Sarah arrived first, a tall professional woman with a no-nonsense air. She carried a condolence card. "Eleanor," she began, her expression soft with sympathy. "I am so sorry for your loss. Samuel was a wonderful man." "Thank you, Sarah. He was," I said, accepting the card. I placed it gently on the desk, then folded my hands. I've asked you here on a business matter. I need you to bring me Kevin Stone's complete employment file. I want everything. His initial application, his performance reviews, attendance records, client feedback reports, and a log of any and all formal complaints or disciplinary actions. Sarah's professional mask faltered. She blinked, clearly taken aback. Eleanor, with all due respect, now might not be considering the circumstances. I met her gaze and I did not waver. Sarah, I said, my voice quiet but laced with steel. Samuel's passing was a tragedy, but it also means that his controlling interest in this company, as stipulated in his will, has transferred to me. I am now the sole owner and president of the board of Legacy Homes. My concern right now is not about family sensitivities. It is about the health and integrity of this company, which employs over 200 people. Please get me the file. The shift in her demeanor was immediate. The sympathy was replaced by a crisp professionalism. Of course, Mrs. Stone, she said and left the room. She returned minutes later with a file that was alarmingly thick. Please sit, I said, gesturing to the chair opposite the desk. For the next 20 minutes, we sat in silence as I read, and with every page, my resolve hardened into something akin to diamond. It was a catalog of negligence and arrogance. There were scathing performance reviews from his direct supervisors, all of them, inexplicably followed by a CEO override note from Samuel, complete with a generous unearned bonus. There were records of dozens of days taken off with no notice. There were 3 formal complaints from female subordinates regarding his dismissive attitude and inappropriate comments, all of which had been quietly settled by the previous head of HR. The worst was the client feedback. I saw the official report on the Henderson account, a multi-million-dollar commercial project we had lost 2 years ago. The notes were damning. Kevin had missed 2 critical planning meetings and had submitted the final bid a day late, causing us to be disqualified. I found his expense reports, a document of pure fiction, filled with charges for $500 dinners with clients on weekends, at restaurants I knew were Chloe's favorites. He had been using the company as his personal slush fund for years. I closed the file. The silence in the room was heavy. I looked at Sarah, whose expression was carefully neutral, but whose eyes held a flicker of understanding. She had known, they had all known, but their loyalty to Samuel had kept them quiet. Prepare his termination papers, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. The cause will be gross negligence, consistent violation of company policy, and misappropriation of company funds. Severance will be the legal minimum. His company credit cards are to be canceled immediately. And please, have security on standby. I want him escorted from the building as soon as the meeting is over. Sarah simply nodded, the flicker in her eyes now something akin to relief. She stood and left to carry out my orders. The gears of consequence were now in motion. For 8 years, this company, his father's legacy, had served as Kevin's personal playground and bank account. Playtime was over. I sat back in Samuel's chair, the worn leather cool against my back, and I waited for the sound of my son's arrival. I knew he wouldn't be late today. I waited in the profound silence of Samuel's office, the termination papers a stark white rectangle on the polished surface of the desk. The air was still, pregnant with a tension that felt almost electric. An hour crawled by, then another. It was almost 11 o'clock when I finally heard a commotion in the outer office. A loud, jovial laugh that I knew all too well, followed by the sound of him breezing past Brenda's desk without stopping. A moment later, my office door swung open. Kevin sauntered in, holding a ridiculously oversized cup of designer coffee. He was wearing an expensive suit but had forgone a tie, an affectation of casual power he had adopted. He didn't even seem to register Sarah Morgan standing stiffly near the window. His eyes, full of casual arrogance, landed on me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, a condescending smile playing on his lips as he leaned against the doorframe. "Trying out Dad's chair? If you wanted to see me, you should have just called my assistant. I had a tea time at 1. I let his words hang in the air, the sheer, breathtaking narcissism of them, a perfect opening statement for the proceedings. I didn't smile. "Close the door, Kevin," I said, my voice quiet but carrying an authority that made him straighten up slightly. "And take a seat. This won't take long." He glanced at Sarah, then back at me, his smile faltering as he finally sensed the cold atmosphere in the room. He swaggered to one of the plush chairs in front of the desk and dropped into it, stretching his legs out. "All right," he said, taking a loud slurp of his coffee. "What's this all about? Some kind of family meeting?" "No," I replied, my hands folded calmly on the desk. "This is a corporate performance review. I've been spending the morning getting reacquainted with the state of the company, specifically your contributions to it." He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "My contributions? Mom, with all due respect, I'm the executive vice president. I've been running the day-to-day of this place for years. Dad trusted me with everything. I'm not sure this is the best time for you to be concerning yourself with. Let's start with the Henderson account." I cut him off, my voice as sharp and clean as breaking glass. His mouth snapped shut. "Sarah's file tells me we lost a $2 million contract because you failed to attend 2 critical planning meetings and then missed the final submission deadline. Would you care to explain that?" His face began to flush a deep mottled red. "That was a clerical error," he sputtered, shooting a venomous glare at Sarah. "The assistant screwed up the scheduling. It wasn't my fault." "Then let's discuss your expense reports," I continued, my gaze unwavering. $500 at Le Cirque on a Saturday night for you and Chloe is not a client development expense. Neither are the monthly charges from the Oak Valley Country Club, which you've been billing to the company as conference fees. That is called misappropriation of funds, Kevin. "Now hold on a minute," he said, his voice rising. "I do business at the club. I'm networking." "And finally," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "we have the 3 formal complaints filed by junior staff members against you for workplace harassment. 3 young women whose careers were almost derailed by your arrogance. 3 situations this company had to quietly settle to avoid legal action and public disgrace. 3 secrets your father kept to protect you." The last of his composure shattered. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "This is ridiculous. These are lies. You can go now, Sarah," he barked, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "This is a private family matter." "Sarah stays," I said, my authority absolute. "This is a corporate matter, and you are no longer a part of this corporation." I pushed the white folder across the polished desk. It slid to a stop directly in front of him. "Effective immediately, your employment with Legacy Homes is terminated. The cause is gross negligence, consistent violation of company policy, and misappropriation of funds. Sarah has the details of your legally mandated final severance payment." For a moment, he just stared at the folder as if it were a snake. Then his head snapped up and his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You can't be serious," he hissed. "I have never been more serious in my life," I replied. "You can't do this," he screamed, slamming both his hands down on the desk, rattling Samuel's old pen holder. "Dad is barely cold in his grave, and this is what you do? You come in here and try to destroy his memory? He gave me this company. It's my birthright." "Your father's memory is precisely what I am protecting," I said, my voice remaining eerily calm in the face of his storm. "He built this company on integrity, a word you don't seem to understand. The birthright you speak of was the opportunity he gave you, an opportunity you treated like a personal piggy bank." "I'm your son," he wailed, his voice cracking, his face contorted in a way that was almost pitiful. "Your only son. How can you do this to your own family, to your own blood?" "That is a private pain, Kevin," I said softly, delivering the final cut. "And this is a professional decision." I pressed the intercom button on the desk phone. "Frank," I said, "please come to my office." The door opened a moment later, and 2 uniformed security guards stepped inside. Kevin stared at them, his mouth agape, his face a kaleidoscope of shock, rage, and ultimate humiliation. "Frank," I said, standing up for the first time, "please escort Mr. Stone from the premises. He is no longer an employee here. Ensure he takes only his personal belongings from his office." You witch," he whispered, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was startling. "Goodbye, Kevin," I said and sat back down. The last thing I saw was his stunned face as the guards flanked him and guided him out of the office he thought he owned, and into the hallway filled with the silent, watching eyes of the employees he had for so long lorded over. The office was quiet. I had cut the first head off the Hydra, but I knew the other one, the one who whispered poison in his ear, would not remain silent for long. I had expected a phone call. Instead, I got a hurricane in designer heels. The quiet in Samuel's office lasted less than 20 minutes. It was shattered by a sound from the main lobby, a sound so jarring and out of place it made me flinch. The sharp, furious slam of the building's heavy glass front doors. It was followed by the rapid staccato click-clack of expensive heels on the polished concrete floor, a sound like approaching gunfire. Brenda's voice rose in a panicked, "Ma'am, you can't go back there," but it was ignored. A moment later, my office door was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall, the impact shuddering through the room. Chloe stood in the doorway, a vision of expensive, incandescent rage. She wore a tight crimson dress that likely cost more than my first car, and her perfectly manicured hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Behind her, looking pale and utterly defeated, was Kevin. He was no longer a swaggering executive. He was a shamed schoolboy dragged to the principal's office by his furious mother. But in this case, the roles were reversed. "How dare you!" Chloe shrieked, her voice a shrill weapon. She stormed into the room, her eyes blazing with a fury that was almost theatrical. "You cruel, bitter old woman, sitting here in his chair, acting like you're some kind of queen. You were always jealous of me, jealous of our life, of the love Kevin has for me." I remained perfectly still behind the desk, my hands folded, and watched the performance. I did not flinch. I did not speak. I let her spew her venom into the quiet, dignified space my husband had created. "You think you can get away with this," she continued, advancing on the desk. "We will sue you for everything you have. We will sue this company into the ground. Kevin has rights. This is a family business. That means it's ours. You have no idea the kind of hell I'm about to unleash on you." She leaned forward, her face a mask of contempt. "What would Samuel think if he could see you now? Tearing his family apart, throwing his only son, his legacy, out onto the street like a piece of trash. You are desecrating his memory with your pathetic, lonely bitterness." She finally paused, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling, expecting me to crumble, to argue, to cry. I did none of those things. I calmly picked up the thick manila folder I had been waiting for her to see, the one with the title, "The Kevin and Chloe Ledger," written on the tab. "Sit down, Chloe," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through her hysteria like a razor, shocking her into a momentary silence. "Or don't. It makes no difference to me, but you will listen." I opened the folder. The room was suddenly very quiet, save for Chloe's ragged breathing. Kevin seemed to shrink in his spot by the door. "You speak of my husband's memory," I began, my eyes scanning the first page. "Let's talk about how you've honored it. We'll start with this stack of credit card statements from 2 years ago, totaling just over $42,000. You told Samuel this was to cover your mother's medical bills. But I see here charges from Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, and a boutique called Serafina's. Not a single copay or pharmacy bill among them. My husband, in his kindness, paid for your wardrobe." Chloe's face went pale. The furious red was draining away, replaced by a chalky white. That's not..." I turned the page, ignoring her stammer. "Then we have your first business venture, Chloe's Cups of Heaven. According to these documents, my husband paid a $60,000 advance on a commercial lease, plus another $55,000 for equipment and supplies. The business folded in 6 months because you grew bored of baking, a $115,000 hobby. My husband paid for that too." I could see Kevin muttering her name, a low warning, but she didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes were locked on the folder in my hands. "And my personal favorite," I continued, my voice dripping with ice, "your attempt to become a lifestyle influencer. $45,000 in cameras, lighting, designer clothes for content, and a business trip for you and my son to a resort in St. Bart's. A trip you took, I now see from the dates. During the same week, Samuel had his first round of chemotherapy." The air left the room. The color drained completely from Kevin's face. He looked as though he'd been struck. Chloe simply stared, her mouth slightly agape. She had been exposed. Every lie, every manipulation laid bare on the polished surface of my husband's desk. I closed the folder with a soft, final thud. "You speak of family property. Let me be clear. The designer dress you are wearing, the car you drove here, the very house you sleep in, none of it is family property. It is the property of my husband's relentless, back-breaking work, which the two of you have treated as your personal, bottomless trust fund. You dare to speak to me of desecrating his memory? You who planned a party on the day of his funeral? You who used his boundless love as a tool to fund your pathetic, shallow, and utterly frivolous existence?" I let the words hang in the air, each one a stone dropping into a deep, silent well. Chloe was speechless. The hurricane had been reduced to a dead calm. "Kevin's employment here is terminated," I said, my voice flat, "and your access to this family's generosity is now and forever revoked. The party is over, Chloe." I leaned forward slightly. "I would suggest you start looking for a job. You'll find that life is far more expensive when you're the one paying for it." Then I picked up the phone and pressed the intercom button. "Brenda," I said, my voice as calm as if I were ordering office supplies, "please call security again. We have another trespasser who needs to be shown the exit." The final exquisite humiliation was watching the 2 security guards return. They looked at Chloe, then at me, and I gave a simple, elegant nod. As they stepped towards her, all the fight was gone. She was just a woman in an expensive dress, utterly defeated. She turned and walked out, stiff-backed and silent, the furious clicking of her heels now the sound of a full retreat. Kevin, his face a mask of horror and shame, trailed silently behind her. The office was quiet again. The rot had been cut out of the company. The building was finally clean. But the infection still lived in the house his father had paid for, drove the car his father had co-signed for, and wore the diamonds his father's money had bought. The professional reckoning was complete. The personal reckoning was about to begin. The silence that descended upon Samuel's office after they were gone was absolute. It was a clean, pure silence, no longer heavy with grief, but filled with the crisp air of resolution. A moment later, there was a soft knock on the door. Sarah Morgan and David Chen, our longtime CFO and one of Samuel's most trusted friends, entered the room. Their faces were somber, but their eyes held a new light, one of profound respect and, I realized, relief. "Eleanor," David said, his voice quiet but firm, "I just want you to know you did the right thing. Samuel. He loved his son dearly, but his love often made him blind to what was happening to his company. We saw it. We were worried. You did what he couldn't bring himself to do. You protected his legacy." Sarah nodded in agreement. "The entire staff will be behind you, Eleanor. They respected Samuel, and they will respect this decision. You have our complete loyalty." The affirmation from these two good, honest people settled something deep within me. This wasn't just a mother's vengeance. It was a necessary corporate cleansing. "Thank you, both of you," I said, my voice filled with a gratitude that surprised me. "David, I'd like a full audit of the last 5 years of our expense accounts by tomorrow morning. Sarah, let's begin the search for a new executive VP immediately. I want someone with integrity." My work at the office was done, but my day was far from over. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove downtown to the quiet, wood-paneled offices of our family attorney, Robert Chen, David's older brother. Robert had been Samuel's friend and legal counsel for 30 years. He greeted me with a sad, empathetic smile, assuming I was there to begin the slow, painful process of executing Samuel's existing will. He was mistaken. "I need to make some changes, Robert," I said, sitting opposite him at his large mahogany desk. "Effective immediately. I want to completely restructure our estate plan." For the next hour, I laid out my instructions. I began with the will. I want Kevin removed as a beneficiary entirely. He is to receive nothing from my estate or from Samuel's. Robert's eyebrows shot up, but he was too professional to comment. He simply made a note. "Everything," I continued, "the company, our real estate holdings, our personal savings and investments. I want it all to be placed into a charitable trust upon my death. We will call it the Samuel Stone Foundation." My voice was strong, filled with a purpose that felt more right than anything I had done in years. The foundation will have 2 primary missions. First, it will provide scholarships and grants to young people entering the skilled trades: plumbing, carpentry, electrical work. It will honor the craft that my husband loved. Second, it will provide financial assistance to the families of cancer patients to help with the costs that insurance doesn't cover. It will honor the battle he fought. A slow smile of understanding spread across Robert's face. He finally saw what I was doing. This wasn't about disinheritance. It was about legacy. It was about transforming wealth that had been used for selfish indulgence into a force for communal good. "That is a beautiful tribute, Eleanor," he said softly. "There is one more thing," I said, my tone shifting from creation to demolition. The $400,000 down payment on our son's house. I have the documents here. I need to know our position. He spent 10 minutes reviewing the paperwork I'd brought from the office. This is interesting, he said, tapping a clause on the page. Samuel didn't structure this as a simple gift. It's a private, interest-free loan co-signed by you, and this clause states that the loan is contingent upon the beneficiary, Kevin, remaining in good standing with the family and the family business. I would say that gross negligence and termination for cause constitutes a loss of good standing. What does that mean exactly? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It means, Robert said, a grim look in his eyes, that you have the legal right to call in the full amount of the loan due immediately. Or, even more simply, you can notify the primary mortgage lender that you are officially withdrawing your financial guarantee on their entire home loan. Given your financial backing was almost certainly the reason they were approved for a loan of that size, the bank will be forced to immediately reevaluate and likely freeze their assets and begin foreclosure proceedings. Do it, I said without a moment's hesitation. Withdraw the guarantee. Send the official notice to the bank today. Before I left his office, I made 2 final phone calls. The first was to Mr. Harrison, the president of the Oak Valley Country Club. The second was to Catherine, the chairwoman of the hospital charity board on which Chloe so proudly sat. My message to both was identical, calm, professional, and devastating. Mr. Harrison, this is Eleanor Stone. I feel it is my duty to inform you that as of this morning, Kevin Stone is no longer affiliated with Legacy Homes in any capacity due to a number of serious professional and ethical violations we recently uncovered. I thought you should know. I didn't need to say more. I didn't need to gossip or sling mud. The simple, cold facts would be enough. News, particularly bad news, travels faster than light in a town like ours. By dinner time, they would be social lepers. I drove home as the streetlights began to flicker on one by one against the darkening sky. I had not raised my voice. I had not shed a single tear since that first terrible morning. I had dismantled my son's professional life, erased his inheritance, torched his social standing, and initiated the collapse of his financial security, all in a single quiet afternoon. I felt no rage, no glee. I felt a profound, solemn peace. I had cleaned my husband's house. I had planted the seeds of consequence. Now, all I had to do was wait for the harvest. The days that followed were quiet, for the first time in nearly a year. Since Samuel's diagnosis had first cast its long shadow over our lives, I began to find a semblance of a new routine. I spent the mornings in my garden, my hands in the cool, dark earth, tending to my late husband's prize-winning roses. I reread his favorite books in the evenings, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands. I did not seek out news of Kevin and Chloe. I did not have to. In a town as tightly woven as Maple Creek, news, especially of a spectacular fall from grace, travels on the wind. The first reports came from my cousin Martha, delivered over the phone in a hushed, conspiratorial tone. She had been at the Oak Valley Country Club for her weekly bridge game. She'd seen Kevin on the patio, dressed in his golf attire, approach the table where his usual Saturday foursome was having coffee. He'd clapped one of them on the back, a man who had been his supposed best friend for a decade, and asked if they were ready to tee off. Martha described the excruciatingly awkward silence, the shifting eyes, the 3 other men suddenly discovering bad backs, early meetings they'd forgotten, and urgent calls from their wives. He had been left standing alone, his forced smile slowly melting from his face as he realized he was being politely but firmly shunned. A week later, Martha called again. The official club newsletter had announced that the board had reluctantly accepted the resignation of Mr. and Mrs. Kevin Stone. They had been surgically excised from the social body. The next report was about Chloe. My friend Catherine, the chairwoman of the hospital charity board, called me. She told me, with a tone of grim satisfaction, that the board had held an emergency meeting. Chloe, who had built her entire social identity around her position on that board, had been strongly encouraged to step down to avoid bringing any unwelcome controversy to their fundraising efforts. I could picture the scene perfectly. Chloe, in a room full of women she considered her peers and inferiors, being publicly humiliated, her primary platform for social climbing sawed off at the knees. The whispers followed them everywhere. Friends who had eagerly accepted their dinner party invitations for years now crossed the street to avoid them. The maitre d' at their favorite downtown restaurant suddenly had no tables available for them, indefinitely. Their social world, a glittering facade built on the foundation of my husband's money, had evaporated the moment that foundation was removed. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. The friends that money buys are the most expensive and least valuable of all. Then came the financial tsunami. I had known it was coming, of course. My notification to the bank had been the first domino. About a week after the firings, a tow truck had been seen outside their grand house on Willow Lane. It had quietly, efficiently hooked up Chloe's gleaming white convertible and driven away. The next day it had returned for Kevin's sports car. The ultimate symbols of their unearned status, repossessed in broad daylight for all the neighbors to see. The final public humiliation came, as Martha gleefully reported, at a boutique downtown. Chloe had apparently tried to buy a handbag, a form of retail therapy, I imagined. When the cashier ran her credit card, it was declined. She tried another, declined, and a third, declined. The bank, having received notice that their guarantor had withdrawn her support, had frozen their accounts and canceled all their lines of credit. Chloe, the woman who could once spend 5 figures in an afternoon without a thought, had been forced to leave a store empty-handed. I could only imagine the arguments that must have echoed through the cavernous, empty rooms of that house they no longer truly owned. Their partnership had never been one of love, but of shared ambition and mutual benefit. She had married an heir. He had married a beautiful status symbol. With the money and status gone, there was nothing left to hold them together. Their union, stripped of its financial scaffolding, was collapsing under the weight of their mutual resentment. She would have been vicious, her fear and rage turning on him, the man who had promised her a life of endless luxury. "I didn't sign up for this, Kevin," I could almost hear her screaming. "I married a Stone, a man with a future, not an unemployed failure who can't even pay for a tank of gas." The inevitable conclusion to their sham marriage came a week later. Martha called, her voice low. "Eleanor, I just drove past their place. Chloe was loading the last of her designer suitcases into her sister's car. She's gone." I felt a pang, but it was not of sympathy for Chloe. It was a deep, sorrowful ache for the son I had raised, a man so hollow and so desperate for external validation that he had chosen a partner who valued his bank account far more than his character. He had sacrificed his father's memory for a woman who was now sacrificing him for her own survival. She was gone. His friends were gone. His job was gone. His money was gone. I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that all he had left was his rage and his entitlement. He was a king with no subjects, no castle, and no coin, and I knew that his final desperate pilgrimage would be to my doorstep, to try and reclaim the kingdom he still, delusionally, believed was his. Several months passed. The autumn leaves turned to fire and then fell, leaving the strong, skeletal branches of the oaks and maples bare against a graying sky. The house on Willow Lane was sold at auction to a young family from out of state. I knew because Robert, my lawyer, had a representative from the newly formed Samuel Stone Foundation attend the auction and report back. The sale barely covered the outstanding mortgage. There was nothing left over. Kevin and Chloe's gilded world had been dismantled, sold off piece by piece, and had vanished as if it had never been. One evening in late November, as a cold, biting wind rattled the window panes, there was a knock on my front door. It was not the confident rap of a neighbor or the cheerful tap of a delivery man. It was a soft, hesitant, almost ghostly tapping. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones who it was. I smoothed the front of my sweater, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The man standing on my porch was a stranger, yet I knew his face better than my own. The expensive tailored suits were gone, replaced by a thin, worn jacket and faded jeans. He had lost a significant amount of weight, and the flesh of his face seemed to hang loosely on the bones, making his eyes look hollow and haunted. His hair was unkempt, and a patchy, week-old beard shadowed his jaw. The arrogant, confident swagger of my son was gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of a man who had been comprehensively broken. He looked older, tired, and utterly defeated. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He couldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at the welcome mat at his feet. Can I come in for a minute?" I didn't answer. I simply stepped back, holding the door open, and he shuffled inside, bringing the cold night air in with him. He stood awkwardly in the foyer, looking around at the warm, familiar surroundings of his childhood home as if he were seeing a foreign land. I didn't offer him a seat. I simply waited. He finally spoke, the words tumbling out in a broken, pathetic rush. He told me Chloe had left him, taking what little jewelry she had and disappearing back to her parents' house in another state. He told me the house had been sold, that the bank had taken everything. He was living in a single rented room above a laundromat downtown. He had found a job working the night shift at a gas station on the interstate, pumping gas and stocking shelves. He was by every conceivable measure at the absolute bottom. I listened to his litany of woes, my face impassive. I felt no pity. I felt no satisfaction. I felt a profound and weary sadness. He had recited the facts of his downfall, but I needed to know if he understood the reason for it. When he was finished, a wretched silence filled the hall. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally choked out, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I could be a better son. I could be the son Dad wanted me to be." His words, meant to sound like repentance, sounded like just another negotiation. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and decided to give him a final test. "When was your father's birthday, Kevin?" I asked, my voice soft. He looked up, confused by the question. "His birthday? It's in the summer? June? No, July. I think it's July 10th. "It was May 18th, I said quietly. For 36 years, it was May 18th. He flinched. "What were his favorite flowers, Kevin? The ones I always had in a vase on the dining room table." He guessed, his voice uncertain. "Roses? He liked roses, right?" "He thought roses were pretentious," I said, a wave of weariness washing over me. "He loved the simple white and yellow daisies from my garden. He said they were honest flowers." I saw the flicker of annoyance in his eyes before the mask of remorse fell back into place. He didn't know his own father. He only knew the man's wallet. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out the worn, folded note I had found in Samuel's Bible. "I want to read you something," I said. "This is from your father. He wrote it in his journal a week before he passed." My voice was steady, a clear vessel for my husband's final, heartbreaking words. I read, "Sometimes I wake up at night with a terrible fear. I fear that our Kevin doesn't love us. I fear he loves what we give him. What if, after all this work, all we've managed to raise is a man who doesn't know how to love at all? God, I pray I'm wrong." I folded the note. The silence was deafening. Kevin stared at me, his face pale. I had expected shame or sorrow or even just quiet defeat. Instead, something ugly and familiar twisted his features. The mask of the penitent son slipped, and the raw, snarling face of the entitled prince was revealed one last time. "He wrote that?" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "He wrote that after everything I did for him? After all the pressure you two put on me my whole life to be perfect, to take over the business?" He took a step towards me, his hands clenched. "You did this. You poisoned him against me, and now you've taken everything. I hope you're happy. I hope you die alone in this house, surrounded by your precious memories and all his money." The final unforgivable words hung in the air between us, venomous and sharp. This was the truth. This was the real Kevin. Not a humbled man, but an angry child blaming the world for the consequences of his own choices. I didn't say another word. I simply looked into the eyes of the stranger in my hallway, and with a profound, bottomless sadness, I slowly and deliberately closed the front door in his face. The solid, final click of the deadbolt, locking into place, was the last sound that would ever pass between us. The door was closed. The final cord was cut. I leaned my head against the cool wood, the ghost of my son's rage still hanging in the air. He had wished for me to be alone. He didn't understand that for the first time in a very long time I finally felt free. The harvest was nearly complete. All that was left was to see what, if anything, would grow in the salted earth he had left behind. A year passed. The raw, gaping wound of Samuel's absence began to slowly, tenderly scar over, leaving a permanent ache where my heart used to be, but an ache I could live with. Another year followed. The silence in my home was no longer a suffocating presence, but a quiet companion. I learned to live in the space between the memories, not as a widow in mourning, but as a woman with a new and profound purpose. My life was no longer defined by my son's betrayals, but by the work I now did in my husband's honor. The Samuel Stone Foundation became my life's work, the vessel into which I poured all my remaining love and energy. It was a living, breathing testament to the man he had truly been. I sat as the chairwoman of the board, and every decision we made was guided by a simple principle: to honor the value of hard work and the grace of compassion. Our first scholarship for the skilled trades went to a young man from the tough side of town named Marcus. He was brilliant, with hands that seemed to understand the soul of wood, but his family had nothing. He wanted to be a master carpenter, a furniture maker. I remembered his interview, the fierce, proud light in his eyes as he described his passion for building things that were both beautiful and made to last. He reminded me so much of a young Samuel. When I told him the foundation would be paying for his full 4-year apprenticeship and providing a stipend for his tools, the boy broke down in tears. He is now the top apprentice in his program. The other half of our mission was to help the families battling cancer. We didn't fund research, we funded survival. We paid the mortgage for a mother of 3 who had to quit her job to care for her sick husband. We bought a reliable used car for an elderly man so he could get to his chemotherapy appointments without taking 3 buses. We provided grocery gift cards, paid utility bills, and helped cover the endless, soul-crushing costs that insurance deemed incidental. In the faces of the families we helped, I saw a gratitude that was pure and real. I had taken the wealth that had poisoned my own family and was now using it as an antidote for others, transforming our pain into their relief. It was a redemption of sorts, not for my son, but for the money itself. I heard very little of Kevin, and I did not seek it out. The whispers had long since died down. He was old news. My cousin Martha mentioned once, about a year after he'd left my doorstep, that she'd seen him. He was working at a large home improvement store on the other side of the county, wearing an orange apron and helping a customer load bags of mulch into their car. He looked thin, she'd said, and tired. There was no dramatic story of a comeback, no tale of a brilliant rise from the ashes. He was simply living a small, anonymous life, the kind of life he had always so desperately feared, the kind of life his father had worked so hard to ensure he would never have to live. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, 2.5 years after I had closed the door on him, I saw him for myself. I was at a small, quiet diner on the edge of town, a place I rarely went, having a celebratory lunch with Marcus, who had just won a regional award for a beautiful, handcrafted rocking chair he had built. We finished our meal, and as Marcus stood to leave, a worker in a stained white apron came to clear our table. I looked up to thank him, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Kevin. The years and the hardship had carved new lines into his face. The last vestiges of softness were gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He was thinner than Martha had described, but he also looked cleaner. The rage that had contorted his features on my porch was gone. In its place was a deep, quiet shame. Our eyes met, and for a long moment the world seemed to stop. The clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation faded away. He looked down at the dirty dishes in his hands, then back at me. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. For everything. For Dad's funeral, for the things I said, for all of it." He paused, seeming to search for the right words he had perhaps been practicing for years, in the lonely quiet of his rented room. "It took me a long time to understand," he continued, his gaze steady for the first time. "Working for a living, really working every single day for just enough to get by, I get it now. I finally get what Dad did, what you both did. I get what it cost." The apology was simple, unadorned, and for the first time it felt real. I felt the ice that had encased my heart for years crack, just a little, but it did not melt. Forgiveness was a country I could no longer visit. Too much had been lost, too much had been broken beyond repair, but I could offer him a truth. "Your father's legacy was never the money, Kevin," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It was the work. The pride in building something honest with your own 2 hands." I looked at him, no longer my monstrous son, no longer a ghost, but simply a broken man holding a stack of dirty plates. "Maybe you can start there. Start with the work." I placed a $50 bill on the table, enough to cover our meal and a generous tip. "Take care of yourself, Kevin," I said, and then I stood up and walked out of the diner, leaving him standing there in the wreckage of our shared history. I drove away from the diner, the image of his tired face in my rearview mirror. There would be no tearful reunion, no return to the way things were. Too much had been broken. But for the first time, I saw not a monster, but simply a man paying a long overdue debt to life. My own debts were paid. All that was left was to live out my days in the peace I had finally, truly earned. 5 years have passed since that day in the diner. The seasons have turned, and the world has continued its relentless, quiet spin. My own world has changed as well, in ways I never could have anticipated. About a year after my last encounter with Kevin, I sold the large family house in Maple Creek. It was a beautiful home filled with 4 decades of memories, but it was a house built for a family that no longer existed. Its rooms were too large, its silence too deep. It was a monument to a past I was ready to release. I bought a small, beautiful cottage nestled on the banks of the Santee River, a place of quiet light and moving water. My garden is smaller now, but it thrives, filled with Samuel's beloved daisies and my fragrant herbs. The walls are not filled with ghosts, but with a carefully curated collection of my happiest memories. A photo of Samuel and me on our wedding day, his smile so young and full of hope, pictures of my parents, a framed drawing Kevin made for me when he was 6 years old, of a smiling son in a crooked house. The house is not a shrine to what I've lost, but a celebration of the love that remains. The Samuel Stone Foundation is now a powerful force for good in the community. I have long since stepped down from the day-to-day operations, handing the reins to a brilliant young woman who runs it with a passion and efficiency that would have made Samuel proud. I remain as the honorary chairwoman of the board, reading the quarterly reports that detail the lives we've changed. The dozens of students who have graduated from trade schools, now working as skilled artisans, and the hundreds of families who have found a helping hand during the darkest days of their cancer battles. My husband's legacy is no longer a number in a bank account, but a living, breathing network of compassion and opportunity. It is strong, it is secure, it is good. One brilliant Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, I was sitting on my porch, a book resting in my lap, watching the sunlight dance on the surface of the river. A modest, late-model sedan I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A man got out, and for a moment, my heart caught in my throat. It was Kevin. He was in his early 40s now, and the passage of time and the weight of a different kind of life had reshaped him. The haunted, broken look was gone. The years of honest physical labor had put strength back into his shoulders and his hands. He was dressed in simple, clean work clothes. The last vestiges of the arrogant prince and the wretched victim were gone. He looked, for the first time in his life, simply like a man. He walked up the path to my porch, not with a swagger or a shuffle, but with a quiet, steady confidence. He was holding something in his hands. "Hello, Mom," he said, his voice calm. "Kevin," I replied, my voice equally steady. He stood before me, and he did not ask for a thing. Not for money, not for forgiveness, not even to come inside. Instead, he held out the object he was carrying. It was a small wooden box made of a deep, rich cherry wood polished to a soft gleam. The joints were perfect, the lid fitted with a craftsman's precision. It was simple, elegant, and beautiful. "I made this for you," he said. "I've been taking woodworking classes at the community college at night. It's the first thing I've ever made that I'm proud of." I took the box from him. It felt warm and solid in my hands. It was a tangible thing, a thing of substance born not of money or privilege, but of patience, skill, and work. It was the proof that he had finally understood my last words to him in that diner years ago. He had started with the work. It was the first small piece of his own legacy. A silence fell between us, but it was not the angry, painful silence of the past. It was a new silence, one of peace and acceptance. "Would you like some iced tea?" I asked. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "I'd like that very much." He sat with me on the porch and we drank our tea, watching the river flow by. He told me about his life. He was a shift manager now at a small cabinet-making workshop. He enjoyed the work. He had saved up enough to buy his used car with cash. He lived in a small, clean apartment. His life was not grand, but it was his. He had built it himself. He didn't stay long. As the sun began to dip towards the trees, he stood to leave. "Thank you for the tea, Mom," he said. "Thank you for the beautiful box, Kevin," I replied. He walked back to his car and drove away. There were no dramatic tears, no sweeping declarations of forgiveness. The vast, shattered landscape of our past could not be so easily mended. But the war was over. I was left alone on my porch in the golden afternoon light, holding the small, perfect box my son had made. It was not an absolution, but it was an offering, a beginning. It did not erase what had been broken, but it was proof that even in the most salted and barren earth, something new, something honest, could eventually, painstakingly, grow. The door to his past was not wide open, but for the first time in a very long time, it was no longer locked. And I was at peace,